morning, everyone, and welcome to You Can't Govern Data That You Don't Understand. I'm really happy to have an almost full room to talk about data governance because, as we know, it's not the sexiest, keynotiest topic, but it is one of the most important topics we talk about as data professionals. I'm Joey D'Antoni. You're at SQLBits. I'm principal consultant at Denny Train Associates Consulting. I do lots of stuff with data and clouds. I don't really like to hone myself into any one technology or framework, but I've been working with data and databases for longer than I care to admit at this point. We'll just say it involves parts of 4 decades now. I did that math this morning while I was writing something. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. I'm also a VMware vExpert. If you have any hatred comments to be directed at Broadcom, I'll take those too. You'll know this if you're a VMware customer. You can find me on Twitter at jdanton. I also blog at joeydantoni.com, and I write a monthly column at Redmond Magazine, and I'm going to have probably a new one out today about some of the Copilot stuff that was announced this morning. So let's talk about data governance. I kind of got into data governance. I've always known about data governance, and just a quick survey of the people in the room. How many of you are BI professionals? Okay, if you're online, that was about half the room. How many are you DBAs? Okay, that was about 10%. How many of you are just system administrators? Okay, nobody. System administrators clearly don't care about data governance. A lot of times this role falls on BI professionals because when you start to do BI projects, inherently data quality becomes a big issue. One of the things I want to talk through in this session, and we only have 20 minutes, is that data governance really isn't an IT function, but a business function. You can't be successful in an IT org strictly managing data governance. That's not to say IT doesn't play a key role, and we're going to talk through what that means in helping the business and facilitating the process. But without business folks to understand things like master vendor list or master data, it's going to be really difficult for an IT org to provide those services. And let's just start by saying what the definition of data governance is. This is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, who does a pretty good job of defining things in general, in my opinion. And we're going to say a set of processes that ensures that data assets are formally managed throughout the enterprise. A data governance model establishes authority and management and decision-making parameters related to the data produced or managed by the enterprise. And technology plays a significant role in helping institutions manage all of these components. But at the end of the day, data governance is a people problem because it's the behavior of the people using the technology that determines whether or not data is being used correctly. Data governance is about the way people, controlling the way people behave with regard to the data and data technology. It's going to identify the appropriate people to manage and govern various types of data. It sets policies outlining appropriate uses of data and rules of behavior. It also embeds those rules into everyday processes across the institution. And we're going to talk throughout this session on how the governance of people, policies, and process supports technology ownership, data quality, access, and security. One of the kind of interesting things, and really I think how I got more deeply embedded in data governance in recent years, is this notion of security. One of the things that has really changed the way organizations approach security is this little regulation. I'm sure you haven't heard of it. It's called GDPR. One of the most interesting GDPR stories and finds I've heard about in recent years related to British Airways, and we can say what we want about British Airways' data technology and who they hire and all those sorts of things. But one of the things that happened to them was they had a data breach and they got a GDPR fine for it. But in whatever function that was, they had enough data governance that they could say, hey, this wasn't an in totality data breach. These were the specific records that got breached. And they were only able to do that because they had a data catalog. They knew what data was where. And they could go back to the regulators and say, hey, this wasn't a complete breach of all of our customer data. It was a breach of this specific subset of data. And they were able to get their fine reduced tremendously by doing that. And to me, that was a really interesting turning point in the way I thought about data security as well as data governance. But one of the things when we talk about security, and this is kind of how I landed in data governance, when we think about data security, or when we think about IT security in general and how we secure systems, security controls are pain, right? So like when we add additional security controls, whether they be multi-factor authentication or encryption or name your other favorite security control, it makes things harder to do. We don't want to necessarily apply the highest level of security to all of our data. If somebody's, say, doing something very inconsequential like logging into a shared calendar, we don't necessarily need to have that have the same level of security as our master customer list or medical information. However, by cataloging data and quantifying what data is where, it can allow us to apply the really good security controls to the data that we really need to secure, and likewise to those systems, while at the same time not making that pain across the organization. And when we think about that security aspect of data governance, we want to protect from unauthorized access, data corruption, and data breaches. We also want to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We also have concerns about usability. It's really difficult when you have a data warehouse if your data is poor quality. You have missing records, duplicate records, and these are all things we can address as part of our data engineering process. But it's even better as if we're having a master list of data somewhere that our source data is getting checked against. And these things are all very important. And then finally, compliance. My compliance background is largely because I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for about 7 years. And we had all the regulations, so I got pretty used to dealing with some of those things. But just being able to have a good data catalog, be able to explain what data is stored in your organization and how it's secured, all of these things really help with compliance. So we kind of have this Venn diagram of security, usability, compliance, and data quality, and that's what makes up our data governance model. So when we talk about data governance, it has various roles. So I use this image of oil and water here. So IT is responsible for governing its own data. So if we think about this like from an IT organizational perspective, things like knowing which server is responsible for which role, that's IT's data. Knowing who's the current customer list, that's the business's data. So this is where a well-designed governance program is typically going to include various roles with different responsibilities. You'll note I'm not going to include a lot of IT roles. IT is going to be involved in this process, and they may even need to drive this process. But the way this should work is you should have a senior executive who's overseeing and sponsoring the program, and a governance team that has representatives from each portion of your business, including IT. But that governance team is going to act as a governing body, and they'll have a group of data stewards, which are typically going to have representation in each part of the business. These folks are going to work together to create the standards and policies for governing data, as well as the implementation and enforcement procedures, and that's going to be carried out by the data stewards. IT is going to come in where they have a data management team. What we're going to do as IT professionals is help facilitate the tooling, help provide our technical knowledge where necessary, maybe on how to apply things like security controls. But the business has to provide that knowledge of the data. And data governance is simply a component of a data management strategy. Organizations need to focus on their expected business benefits for their governments for it to be successful. It's not something that you can do by yourself as an IT professional. We don't know the data, we don't have the control, and frankly, we don't have the power to tell the business what to do in most organizations. We do have a lot of tools, and this is where things can get kind of confusing as to whether or not this is an IT project. We have tools like Purview, which is purported as, a data catalog, a security tool, an audit tool, and it does a lot of cool things. And it's kind of hard to implement all that by yourself, and it does some scanning, so it's a little bit self-service. But don't think you can buy Purview and have a data governance program. what you do is you have a data governance program, you start to identify data sources, and then you can start to buy and use a tool like Purview, because it's gonna be helpful, but you need the right people to be able to use it. Having a data catalog is something that's foundational, and yeah, that's a component of Purview as well. But you don't necessarily have to buy a tool to do this. You can build a data catalog in a series of Excel spreadsheets. Of course, the tooling is gonna do that better, but it's more important that you have that knowledge and understanding in that framework. Some other tools include Irwin, which is a relational database design tool, and Talend, which is also another kind of data governance tool. I really like what the team is doing with Purview in terms of like tagging and security and how it relates to information management. But don't just think you can buy a tool and have data governance. It's definitely a process. And let's talk more about that process and those frameworks. So the ultimate objective of your strategy is to help your organization get the greatest possible return on data. So having some frameworks can help you capture those critical opportunities to leverage your data assets. And this starts out with a few critical factors. You have to have people. So governance matters when you have collaboration and planning. People need to determine their technology requirements. They need to define the policies and process that define those data governance outcomes. And there are some important things to consider. Are the people on your team committed to data governance? Have you formalized their roles? Do they have the necessary skills in terms of data and data literacy? Do they understand what data is? They understand concepts basic, like data duplication and things like that? And finally, have you developed a change management plan around your data, which also is going to include sponsors that supports alignment and buy-in? You also need to have processes. And these processes are going to allow people to confirm that your data is managed throughout the enterprise. Some important points to consider are your data definitions, rules, and goals realistic? Have you modernized your business practices, or are you still using a lot of legacy systems? And also, have you reviewed your business rules to ensure that data governance can deliver meaningful results to your organization? We also have contributors, and these are going to be the business and IT subject matter experts who provide necessary context. These may not be your data stewards, but they're the business leaders, process owners who run the upstream and downstream processes that are going to be impacted by your initiatives. Contributors can include architects, analysts, and system experts. And identifying these contributor stakeholders is really important. One of the things we've run into at customers before is like organizations who had trouble identifying their sales because different people in the organization had post-processing steps that were running, Excel spreadsheets. So like the sales report was generated through the data warehouse in the sales process, except that 5 different people ran different Excel spreadsheets against it that had different tools involved. So you never had a consistent view of that data. So when you're building these process, you need to figure out those people who own those Excel workbooks and get them in your process. I just saw today on Twitter, there was a tweet about the Williams F1 team and how they're facing fines because their entire parts management program was run through Excel, and apparently I guess that wasn't approved. If we lost Excel, we would lose the world. Finally, technology, and you'll note technology is the last point I mentioned on this slide. It is probably the least important part of your data governance framework. It can help make things easier, but it's not the end-all be-all. But these are the platforms and tools that enable the processes. So things like Purview, data profiling, lineage, and metadata tools can help us have a more efficient process. But remember, it's people. So security and data governance has been kind of an interesting path in recent years. Really, this comes down to being able to know what data you have, knowing how to classify it, and apply appropriate security controls. Like we mentioned, all security is a pain in the pick your favorite body part, neck, I'll say. But adding security controls makes things harder. We don't want to make our users hate us. Well, there are probably some people in IT security that are masochists and do want to make their users hate them. But in general, we want to make things flow easier. But at the same time, we want to apply security controls because security, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of people trying to breach a lot of systems. Many of them are in a country that's a few countries over that's invading another country a few countries over too. Don't want to shame anybody, but yeah, they host a lot of evil people. So security is in a really important spot. Having classified data allows for those stronger security controls. The other thing it does that I think is also underrated, it makes it easier when you have a well-defined governance process. It makes it easier to define data roles. And that sets up things like role-based access control and who can view what data or who can update or who can run reports and those sorts of things. Having that clearly defined makes it a lot easier. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to implement like net new permissions on a data warehouse or something like that. It's a lot to get from an organization, especially that doesn't have a governance function like this. Who should have access to this and how should they have access? And it also typically is going to allow better business outcomes because of improved data quality. Having those focuses is going to help us not just have better security, but help with compliance as well. So as data users and consumers keep growing, having a very small governance team can be challenging. It's really hard to do this with a small number of people. Like, typically, you're going to need representation from every department in your organization because they're going to know their data and their systems better than anyone else. So having that bottom-up data management approach that makes those data creators responsible for their own data governance is going to be extremely helpful in facilitating that data governance program in your organization. And beyond compliance, like we say, we're going to have better decision making and more accurate data if it's consistent. We want to know who our customers are. We want to know that data is current. We want to be able to make decisions without having anybody question the nature of the data. My favorite business intelligence project that I got to work on was for this company. It was a family-owned company, and the third generation of the family wanted to sell the company, but they couldn't put a valuation on the company because nobody was confident in their sales reporting. So they couldn't tell prospective buyers, how much we sold last year. We were able to help them rectify that, but governance is a key part of that. So let's talk finally in summary. One of the things that's really important about data governance projects, because they typically involve change in process at a pretty high scale, especially if you didn't have a data governance function before, is it's always important to have a senior executive sponsoring the process. Just because you need to be able to tell managers and directors and senior directors and even VPs, I need to pull, Joe or Mary off of a project and get them involved in this data governance function. And it's not necessarily a full-time job, but it's definitely a part-time job. And having that executive sponsorship and understanding of data governance at that level, at least at a 10,000 foot level, is really a #1 best practice for sustaining a data governance program. It's also not the most exciting data topic, and I'm shocked and happy that this many people showed up to this session, but it is one of the most important because all the business intelligence and Fabric stuff we see this week, it doesn't work if your data quality sucks. Or it works, but who cares what your sales report is if you don't think it's accurate, or it's got to be run through 10 people's Excel spreadsheet macros to be effective. This is my mantra. Establishing a data governance framework is not an IT function, it's a business function. IT is going to facilitate it, but the business needs to be involved at every step of the way. Because if you work in IT, for those of you who are DBAs, could you confirm your company's master vendor list? No, I didn't think so. I didn't see any hands go up. But having good data governance improves both your security and compliance posture and helps you to deliver better business outcomes. And with that, we have 1 minute left for questions. So I'll take them. No questions? Yes.
Have you seen this work in any company yet?
The question was, have I seen this work in any company? Yeah, I've seen data governance. We've done projects like this for several small to medium-sized companies. In enterprises, it's a lot more challenging. When I worked for Comcast Cable in the US. That was the last time I worked for a big company. And we had every business intelligence system, if you named a business intelligence system, we had it. And we had like 5 different data governance functions. So that's where it's challenging. But we didn't have that executive sponsorship, and we didn't have that leadership team of data governance folks. But that's the way you implement it. Question in the back. The question was, where would you define the overlap of master data management versus data governance? I think master data governance is a subset of I just made 2 terms. Master data management is a subset of data governance, because that's going to be one of your core components is maintaining that master data list. One of the things I don't like about Purview is it doesn't really have a master data function, and I really wish it did, because I think that would be a useful feature. That is time. If anybody has any questions, you can come up and I'll take them. Thank you very much.